Hello, everyone. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and I'm being joined tonight by my good friend, Dee Pierce of Around the World with Dee and Friends.
So
Hello,
I'm hap-
Dee.
Hello, Joe. Happy to be here tonight. Yes, you're covering a lot tonight, a lot of important information.
Well, thank you. I am very happy that you're here to help me cover it. So, shall we start by sharing on Facebook?
Yes, that's very important to share. Share, share, share.
Okay, let us do that then.
Everybody know Joe's live.
Yep, there we go.
Okay, here we go.
Okay,
And put it in our chat.
yeah.
I always like to send notice to Evelina to let her know we're live.
Oh, because she watches on Facebook, doesn't she?
Yes,
So she's not getting a YouTube notification.
no. So I send it to her messenger that we're live.
Oh, great. Okay,
Okay,
so
let me get some groups.
we have three topics tonight. One is thoughts on Turkiye, otherwise known as Turkey. The second topic is Colonel MacGregor on the Ukraine situation. And the third topic is Trump's crypto killing. He made a big killing on crypto. And while that's not our normal fare on this program, I think it has implications that may be very important. So let's start with thoughts on Turkiye. And I'm going to share the screen with a piece from Pepe Escobar.
That's good.
Yes. And the title of it is What Sultan Erdogan is Really Up To. And he published this at UNS just yesterday, January 29, 2025. And there's a picture, okay, of Erdogan dressed as a sultan uh, with a palette and brushes, painting various things in the Middle East according to his desires, and a bunch of explosions going up. I guess those are explosions, those yellow things. On the table, a geopolitical banquet served by some of the best independent analytical minds from Bursa to Diyarbakir. I believe those are places in Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
So Pepe was in Istanbul. He says the scene is a Circassian restaurant off fabled Istiklal Street in historic Beyoğlu. I guess that must be a neighborhood inside of Istanbul. On the table, a geopolitical banquet served by some of the best independent analytical minds from Bursa to Diyarbakir. I presume those are both places in Turkey. The menu, apart from a mezza feast, is simple. Only two broad questions about uh, Sultan Erdogan's approach to BRICS and to Syria. Here's a concise synopsis of our dinner, more relevant than a torrent of Western manufactured word salads. Enjoy it with a hefty dose of the best Arak, which is a okay. I believe it's a Turkish brandy. very strong. And let the table have the first and last word. On BRICS, quote, Turkiye feels itself as part of the West. If we look at our political party leaderships and Turkish elites, right wing or left wing, there's no difference. Perhaps a little bit part of the East, Ankara is using its membership in BRICS as a bargaining chip against the West, unquote. Turkiye simultaneously could be a member of BRICS and NATO, question mark. Quote, Erdogan has no clear future plans. After Erdogan, there's no clear answer for the future of the AKP party. They could not establish a normal, permanent system. We have a governmental system just for Erdogan. We are receiving gas from Russia. We buy materials from China. We assemble them in Turkish factories and sell them to Europe and the United States. We have advantages in foreign trade compared to the EU, according to statistics published by the Turkish government. The biggest trade deficit is against Russia and then China. This is our special position and explains why Ankara does not want to lose the Eastern option. And at the same time, we depend on the West to defend ourselves. All that explains our unique foreign policy behavior. So there's no guarantee Ankara will agree to become a BRICS partner. No, but Ankara, this is a quote, no, but Ankara will not completely close the door to BRICS. Turkiye knows the West is losing its power. There are new dynamics, rising powers, but at the same time, we are not a completely independent power, unquote. On the three pillars of Turkish society, you can't think about geopolitics without ideology. Erdogan and the AKP decided that it's only possible to integrate Turkiye with a liberal Islamist project. Almost 2 generations have grown with them, and they don't know what happened before. They are neo-Ottomans, Islamists, pro-Arabization guys. In Turkiye, if someone openly supports Islamism, he is Arabized ideologically. Here we have 3 pillars. The first one is a nationalist view. We have right-wing Kemalism and left-wing Kemalism. The other one is a Western perspective. And the third one, is Islamist. Also divided in 2 factions. One is nationalists, and the other, is liberal Islamist, integrated with Western institutions, with NGOs, and capital. That's why we can say that wokeism and Islamism are different sides of the same coin. These guys are using the Turkish state to maneuver in the broader Middle Eastern geography, but in fact, they're focused on Western-minded neoliberal economy, politics, and society, unquote. There is also neo-Ottomanism revived. Quote, The West planned Syria together with them, the Neo-Ottomans. During the Gaza war, they kept sending oil to Israel. It was a PR thing for Erdogan. He needs to give this message to the grassroots, anti-imperialist, Islamist part of Turkish society. The problem for Erdogan is that Turkiye is different from Arab countries. While Turkish capital is connected to the West, some of it is connected with Russia. And Turkiye is dependent on as much as 40% on Russian energy. But Ankara needs to act in a balanced way, but that does not change the whole picture. Capital that supports him and benefits from him, from Erdogan, including 40% of the Turkish exports going to Europe. When it comes to BRICS, they can try to manage the relationship, but they will never agree to join the BRICS directly, unquote. And the Sultan never sleeps, quote. Erdogan is a pragmatist, but he also is ideological. He can sell out the Palestinians easily. He may be very powerful and grasp how the state system works, but he does not enjoy total obedience from society to rule. That's why he's always aiming for some sort of balance. Can we say that with greater Idlibistan under the control of Turkiye's MIT, okay, that's the intelligence organization in Turkey, with Jolani as one of their main assets, if not the top asset, the MIT knew about the capabilities of HTS, and they knew this would stop in the city of Aleppo. Quote, not all the way to Damascus. That was the original plan. The aim of the operation was attacking the regime. The aim was not the conquest of Damascus. This was the best unexpected result of the attack. The military leadership of HTS said, quote, we lost our best warriors in the first moments of the operation, unquote. But then came the collapse of the Syrian army, unquote. So what does Erdogan really want? Rule over Aleppo or over the whole of Western Syria? Quote, Syria was part of the Ottoman Empire. In his dreams, this is still the Ottoman Empire. But he knows Turkey's limits in trying to rule over Syria, and the Arab world, enraged, could align against Turkey. It is possible partly to have a proxy government in Damascus. This is what Erdogan wanted from the Assad government only 6 months ago. He was begging to Assad, quote, please come to the table, unquote. It turned out he was actually sincere. Jolani said, quote, we were really anxious that Assad would accept the offer by Erdogan. This was the Assad's government's big mistake. It had already lost the ability to rule the country. Ankara never wanted the sudden collapse of the Assad government. To rule this chaos is not easy, and Turkiye does not have the military capacity to do it. HTS also does not, and without Turkiye, HTS cannot survive, unquote. So you understand that in this article, what Pepe is doing is expressing the opinions of those he spoke to at this wonderful banquet in Istanbul. So Syria as a province, of of neo-Ottomanism is not going to happen, question mark. Quote again, this is not Turkiye's strategy. This is American and Israeli strategy to cantonize Syria. So they achieved something, but it's not finished. We don't know what's going to happen. Remember, before October 7th, geopolitically, no one could foresee what happened in Gaza. In Turkey's case, this was a joint project. It began in 2011. The main goal was so obvious to integrate Syria into the Western world. That failed, but the Americans stayed there because they created a brand called, quote, ISIS, unquote. Okay, there was American investment in the Kurds, and in the end, Turkiye, what they got, okay, was Idlib. It was necessary at the time because Syria, Russia, Iran, they're not like the Americans or American collected connected Islamists. They are not a disruptive power. Step by step, they wanted to, quote, earn, unquote, Turkiye with the Astana process. Turkiye, in the end, stuck with the American policy. They waited and waited and waited, and now they have something other than what they wanted. And that's an alarming situation for Turkiye because they don't want Syria to be partitioned. It's not even certain that the Americans will let Turkiye train the new Syrian army. The West now has total economic leverage, unquote. This is according to the informants of Pepe Escobar. What he's been doing is giving us, throughout this article, what people were thinking at the banquet, okay, that he was at. He is summarizing it all here. So, Dee, how interesting, huh?
Yes, it is very interesting. Yes.
I said to sit down. Sit.
Yeah, that's what Erdogan has always been this tricky character.
Yes, and I guess that's why he's this tricky character. He has to be this tricky character because there are so many different strands in the society in Turkey, and so many different orientations of people, and there are various degrees of westernization, and there's also traditional society, okay, and there are the Arabists as well, and he has to walk a fine line among all these interests.
And he keeps getting reelected, so he is walking that fine line.
He's walking the fine line, but he himself is looking for a neo-Ottoman empire, and in his dreams he wants to be the sultan of that empire.
Yes, we see that.
He's not really independent, but he's playing a balancing game, and he has to play that balancing game because he's dependent for as much as 40% on Russian energy. He's dependent on outside for capital, and he's dependent on the outside for the Turkish exports. He's got to export 40% to Europe. So he's a man in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, he's an ideologue, but he's also got to be very careful and very clever and very pragmatic.
Well, that's on the one hand, where Syria is concerned, you have him with his neo-Ottoman dreams, and then you have Israel with the Greater Israel.
Yes, you have that. Okay, but also Turkey doesn't.
Hmm.
Uh, Turkey doesn't have what it wanted to have. Okay, inside of Syria. Okay, it has problems. It doesn't have the whole of Syria. It only has a part of it. It can't really easily control that part. It wanted to take over more and more of Syria with the Astana process, but instead he suddenly has a big part of Syria, what Turkey does, and it doesn't know what to do with that part. So, as Pepe said, it's an alarming situation for Turkiye because they don't want Syria to be partitioned. And yet, between the Americans and Israelis, uh, they do want it to be partitioned. It's not even certain the Americans would let the Turks train the new Syrian army. And if we're talking about the economic leverage, the West has that now in spades. So Turkey and Sultan Erdogan are somewhere in the middle, having to balance off everything in a very difficult spot from a geopolitics point of view. So let's see what kinds of comments we have about this. Uh, I think they are mutually dependent. Uh, I should say, first of all, hi, Steve. Hi, Sandy. Okay, and Evelina, hi. Uh, Evelina asks, did he say Turkiye depends on HTS in Syria or vice versa? I think it's a mutual dependence. I think Turkiye is depending on HTS, but HTS is also depending on Turkey for military training and financial support. So it is very mutual. Even it says, according to TRT, Jolani asked Russia to turn over Assad uh, 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 during the recent meeting. He may have asked them, but there's no way Russia's going to turn over Assad. Russia, I don't think Putin would ever do that. Evelyn, he says, of course, the U.S. will not let Turkey train the Syrian army. That's obvious. Yes, it is obvious. But it's probably something that's really bothering Turkey. So that, I think, okay, is very interesting. Okay, D, any comments?
Um, like I said, he's got a lot on his plate. I mean, Turkey's got a lot on their plate, and there's just so much going on.
They have a
But
lot on their plate, and maybe what they have on their plate is more than they have the capacity to handle.
that's true. And we see them, looking at BRICS, but also they have that traditional friends with the U.S., but the U.S., we're not looking good. So it's almost like with Saudi Arabia too. It's kind of like they're friendly with the USA, but kind of keeping the ear open with BRICS.
Yes. Okay, let us shift over now to Colonels Davis and also Colonel MacGregor for a part of their video, a considerable part of their video, which as we move forward, we will analyze and comment on because it's extremely striking. I will share the screen for the video. I hope we don't get much in the way of buffering.
It isn't coming out of Moscow.
Let me move back a little. Okay. We are getting a little bit of buffering here. Let's see if I can do this.
That Putin is the one.
This is the giant king crab leg that all the food bloggers are raving about. Freshly sourced from Hokkaido, these king crabs are
One who is creating fiction in his head that doesn't exist. And gracious, when you look at a map and you look at the what's happened over the last, I don't know, 18 months or so, just as a minimum, there's probably somebody who's not looking at things realistically, and it isn't coming out of Moscow.
That was Colonel Davis, of course.
Well, this is an artificial world created by the so-called globalists, neocons, whatever you want to call them, that have hijacked our government and gained control of most of the governments, certainly in Western Europe. And in this artificial world, those kinds of statements are taken seriously. We know they're all nonsense. President Putin has absolutely no interest in marching further west, but he's going to do whatever is required to secure his country's interests in Eastern Europe. That's very simple. And right now, that's stabilizing Eastern Ukraine, coming to a new territorial arrangement, and hopefully with us and our so-called European allies, some sort of arrangement regarding the size and movement of forces. You know, one of the more disturbing things that I've heard recently is an attempt to link nuclear arms reductions to some sort of deal in Ukraine. The Russians are happy to talk to us about reductions in nuclear armaments, but it's not going to be linked to Ukraine. Ukraine is an entirely different set of circumstances, but it's back to this notion of we want Ukraine to join NATO. By the time this war ends, I don't think there will be a NATO. This is self-delusion on a titanic scale. You know, there's something else that's wrong here. President Trump is not a stupid man, and he knows this is not his war. He's under no obligation to pick it up and carry it forward. He's making a mistake that Nixon made in 1968 or 1969 by pressing forward into Cambodia, widening the war, ultimately sustaining more casualties, more human losses after he becomes president than Johnson sustained while he was president. This is unnecessary. President Trump needs to get out of it. He has a very, very ambitious domestic policy agenda. If he wants to achieve anything with that domestic policy agenda, he needs to shut down these overseas adventures. None of these things are important to us as Americans. Not a bit.
I want to zero in on the first thing that Zelensky was saying.
Okay, before we go further, I just want to emphasize that what Doug is saying there is that Ukraine is not important to us. Israel and West Asia is not important to us, at least not compared to the domestic issues we have. From Doug's point of view, our domestic issues in this country are primary. Remember, Doug is a military man, a military hero, actually in the first of the Gulf Wars, a commander of tanks, very noted, a good writer, and a great analyst. But he's an analyst of foreign policy and geopolitics also. And he thinks that our priorities now should be on fixing our domestic problems. Now, to do that, we have to wind up the foreign adventures that we have undertaken. So keep in mind that that is his point of view. That is the way he orients, to everything. Also, Dan Davis kind of shares that for you too, as you'll see.
In there, though, you talk about there's an agenda with what a lot of the Western European countries want, et cetera. And obviously they seem to be very intent and happy to do anything that's going to, quote, harm Russia. But that has a limit. And if it harms them too much, apparently, there could be some limit there. Do you think there's any prospect that Zelensky was asking there that he wants literal security guarantees from Europe? Is there any states in Europe that are willing to go to war to Russia in order to protect Zelensky?
Not that I'm aware, although Starmer's London government has made noises in that direction. Of course, Starmer's government is on slippery ice these days. I don't think he's going to last much longer. I think he's about to go the way of Liz Truss. Bismarck was asked, I think in 1875, what would you do if the British Army landed on the shores of Germany? Bismarck scoffed and said, well, I'd send the police out to arrest it. And people sort of stood back and said, what does he mean? Well, what he meant was very true. The British Army was so small, so incapable, that it posed absolutely no threat to the German state or the German people. And if that was going to be an instrument of strategic statecraft, it would fail. Well, you've got to.
Okay. So Doug, who has a very good knowledge of history, especially, of European history and military history, in various wars, is telling us, that's his way of telling us, that the military capability of the UK these days in terms of ground troops and the capability of landing ground troops somewhere and making a difference is absolutely nil. And that from the standpoint of the Russians, all they'd have to do is send the police to arrest them if they tried it. Okay, any comments about that, Dee?
No, I don't have any comments.
I thought it was worth a laugh or two.
Got a similar situation today. Anybody in Europe who stands up and talks about we're going to punish Russia militarily, short of nuclear weapons, and of course the use of any nuclear weapon is instantaneous suicide. But if you're going to try and do it at all, you're going to be annihilated. The Russians will annihilate them. They're very practiced now. They understand how this new form of warfare works.
Well,
So I
now,
think-
actually, Doug, on that line, I want to ask you something. I'm gonna pull up here from your book, Margin of Victory, which you published here before, and in one of these sections here, you're talking about stuff that happened during World War II, and I think it's very instructive here because one of the reasons people don't believe what you just said, that the Russian army is all that they need to be worried about it, and why some even think it's possible to give security guarantees, is because they see what happened in the Kherson city, where Russia was forced out in the early or the late summer of 2022, and the Kharkiv area where they were pushed out a lot too. So a lot of the popular belief is that Russia was a lot weaker than they thought, and they probably still are. But here's something that you wrote that I think is very instructive. I don't know if you can tell me how this applies to this current situation. You wrote, during the night of 14-15 September 1941, the armored spearheads of two German armies met at Lokitsa, 120 miles east of Kiev, forming an iron ring around 1.6 million Soviet troops. In what turned into the greatest battle of annihilation in recorded human history, the German Wehrmacht destroyed 4 entire Soviet armies and most of 2 others, inflicting 1 million casualties and capturing 665,000 Soviet soldiers. So one might think that with that level of losses, the war is going to be over right then. But as you continue on, less than 3 years later, on 22 June 1944, the 3rd anniversary of the German invasion of the Soviet Union, 2.5 million Soviet troops launched an offensive, striking German Army Group Center along a 360-mile front offensive, ending at a great semicircle at the Moser on the Pripyat River to the Darwin River. Without interference from the German Luftwaffe, Soviet spearheads had advanced over 125 miles in less than 12 days. By the time the Soviets recaptured Minsk on 3 July, 25 divisions and 250,000 troops had simply vanished. How did Russia go from losing a million and almost 1.6 million people total to then turn it around just 3 years later to go on this juggernaut? And is there any comparison to the current Russian military?
Is it possible to eliminate excess sugar through urine? Most people don't know this.
Well, let me reference something else that some people in the audience may remember, that the Romans suffered catastrophic defeats at the hands of Hannibal, but the Romans built their forces up, restored their forces, changed their forces, adapted them, and eventually they ground the Carthaginians into the dust. You have something similar that happens during World War II. Now, admittedly, I know the Russians don't like to talk about this sort of thing, but we destroyed Germany's oil industry. So by June of 1945, there was enough fuel to keep one German aircraft in the air for about 2 hours, which of course is nothing. And most of the German aircraft were above German cities, trying to prevent the cities from being annihilated from the air by the U.S. and British Air Forces. So this was of enormous value to the Russians, who no longer had to deal with effective German tactical air support. The point is, though, that the Russians always have and have always had the advantage of falling back into the interior. When the Mongols destroyed Kiev in the 13th century, or I guess it's the 13th century, they fell back and then finally moved north. That's why the center of gravity for Eastern Slavic civilization and Christianity moves north to where it is now in Moscow and Smolensk, because the Mongols destroyed Kiev. And they came back again and again and again. They have the depth, they have the cohesion, they have the willpower, the resolve, and the determination. And so we've seen that happen here again. The Russians confronted an enemy they frankly had underestimated. They were aware that we were building a force composed of Ukrainians designed to threaten Russia. They knew that. They knew they needed to intervene to stop it, but they had no idea how strong it was, how much power it could mobilize. And finally, they underestimated their ability to impress us with the small force they sent in to begin with. Well, that's history. Meaningless today. And the destruction of Army Group Center is not a bad analogy for what's happened to the Ukrainians. They are on the verge of going out of business completely. And I wish somebody would stand up and tell the truth, and that includes President Trump, because if he has a humanitarian bone in his body, he should seek to stop this war, period. Stop the losses on all sides. We do not benefit from the deaths of Russians or Ukrainians. I don't know why anybody would say such a thing. But then again, I look at the people who've hijacked control of our government over the last several years, and how much hatred they seem to feel for Russia, and how much hatred they seem to feel for everyone in the Middle East. I guess that's the explanation, but it doesn't make any sense to us as Americans. We have no interest in this mass murder that has been going on. None.
Well, don't, and one wonders if that's.
I want to call your attention to Doug's attitudes here. From his point of view, the war in Ukraine is mass murder. And we shouldn't have been supporting that. We shouldn't have been there. We shouldn't be trying, to prolong the war. The Russians, of course, have won. And he looks at things from that sort of standpoint. And he also looks at it from a humanitarian standpoint. I mean, no one normally hearing Doug talk would think, that he was a humanitarian. Okay, but there he is, pointing up that if Donald Trump has a humanitarian bone in his body, he will stop this slaughter.
Right. It's insanity what's going on.
It's insanity what's going on.
And now, I was going to say, Europe is now looking to get the LNG, the fuel again, from Russia.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And yet there are some in Europe who still want to go ahead with the war in Ukraine.
It's absolutely nuts. It's crazy.
It is absolutely insane, because the Russians have won and they keep on getting stronger. There was another video with Scott Ritter in it today, talking to Danny Ifon. Scott was pointing out that the Russians are in a continuing process to build up their military capability, and they're planning it over a 3-year period. It's not going to stop till 2028. And by the time it does stop, the Russian military will have been built up to 2.5 million people equipped for integrated modern war, where air power is integrated with drone power, is integrated with tank movements, is integrated with artillery. The whole thing integrated to create an absolute inferno of war, which the Russians learned how to fight inside of Ukraine over the last 3 years or so, and which ourselves and our allies have no experience with. No experience at all. So from Doug's point of view, and Danny Davis also, there's no purpose in continuing this war. And there's no way that we, the United States or the collective West, can possibly win it.
Basically, what the U.S. most likely is doing is trying to keep Russia busy and distracted so it can do what it wants to do elsewhere.
Perhaps, but I think what it's also interested in doing, of course, and has been from the beginning, the objective in the Biden administration, and also the objective in the first of the Trump administration also, was to build up a force inside of Ukraine to eventually harm Russia, to hurt it, to bring down the Federation, the Russian Federation, so that the material, natural resources of Russia could be exploited by Western corporations. I mean, that is what our foreign policy has been intended to do since roughly 2008, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we supported the Ukraine coup in 2014. And that's why we built up that large army in Ukraine to fight Russia. At its height, the size of that army was 600,000 people, and they were well armed. And the Russians have defeated them. And in the process, there have been, well, as Doug is about to say here, he believes there have been 1.2 million fatalities among the Ukrainians, which is the highest estimate that I've ever seen one come up with. But anyway, here we go on that.
Going to be forced upon those that are in power here, because I showed you both Trump and Kellogg, who seem to both confidently think that Russia is hurting and therefore they're in need of a negotiated settlement. But then when you look and see what the Ukraine side or the Russian side is saying, they are not quite as tentative as one might think in light of what's going on here. We've had Sergei Lavrov, who said, absolutely no circumstances will we do a ceasefire or a pause, because he said that was only help the other side and it would harm Russia because Russia's on the advantage. And then you see Putin himself, who seems, well, pretty confident.
For anyone struggling with dementia, do not drink cold water.
Just a ceasefire. We need peace. A long-lasting peace.
We don't have any preconditions for talks. We are ready to engage in a conversation without preconditions, but there has to be a basis of something that we've agreed upon during the talks in Istanbul in late 2022, and based, of course, on the realities on the ground at this moment.
He's talking about realities on the ground. I think that what he has in mind and why he is so confident is, first of all, we have General Sirski, the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces is admitting straight up that they don't have, even with forced mobilization, they can't bring enough troops in. So they are already every single day are suffering a net loss to their combat capacity. You've also got here in just the last few weeks, you have first the famous 155th Brigade that was trained in Paris to much fanfare, disintegrated before it even got to the front line. And then now here a couple of days ago, you had the 155th Brigade, a new brigade that was formed in Ukraine itself, likewise fell apart before it came. So I think Putin can see that the forces arrayed against him are literally falling apart by the day. So he can confidently say, I'm not interested in a ceasefire, but he does want a peaceful solution. Do you think that Russia is just saying that and that maybe they're not as strong as they believe? Or do you think he's right?
Well, you also have this man, Budanov, who is the leader of the State Committee on Intelligence in Kiev. And Budanov is nothing if not a complete fanatic, devoted to the idea of killing and destroying as many Russians as possible. And he's effectively said the same thing, that unless extreme measures are adopted, the war is effectively over. Ukraine will not survive. Now, one of the reasons I bring him up is that there's been some talk in the press about some sort of false flag nuclear event with either a nuclear reactor or a dirty bomb or something else. And I would tell you that the one individual whose group is capable of just that sort of insanity is Budanov. And I hope everybody pays attention to that name and watches that very carefully, because that's something that he could do, I think, if he has the right resources at his disposal. And remember, he's strongly backed by the CIA and MI6. Now, the war is effectively over. That's true. But there's a different way to look at everything that President Putin has just said. If you're sitting where President Trump is, knowing his views geostrategically on Europe and NATO, this is an opportunity to do two things. First, go ahead, suspend the aid, military aid to Ukraine. That will bring the war to an end. Then pull out immediately all American military and non-military personnel, intelligence. So it doesn't make any difference. Bring them all out. Get all the Americans out of Ukraine. And then simply send a note to President Putin that when it's convenient, that we're willing to discuss a larger solution to the security situation in Central East Europe, because the war itself is over. We're not talking about the war anymore. That's a done deal, so to say. President Trump needs to understand that. He has an opportunity, though, now to come to a larger agreement with the Russians in Europe. That's a very important thing to do, because Putin wants peace in Europe. The Europeans want peace with Russia. We should want peace with Russia and cooperation with Russia. There is no particular strategic reason why we should be in conflict with Moscow. I would argue that there hasn't been any since Stalin was in power. But the bottom line is, that's where we should be thinking right now. If we meet with the Russians, let's listen to them. What is their proposal for a security arrangement in Europe that prevents any further bloodshed, any further warfare from breaking out? We should do that. Then we can sit back and say, well, we agree with this and this. We're not too keen on that and that. In other words, you can pick and choose and you can talk. You know, this is called diplomacy and negotiation. But what we don't need is to lobotomize ourselves, which is effectively what we're doing right now by answering anything that comes across the desk as, if you don't do what we want, we're going to bully you. We're going to tariff you. We're going to harm you. You know, you're not going to have much success with that. Biden's been doing that, since 2022? Look how successful he's been. So this is all nonsense.
So what do you say?
Somebody has to present that to the president in an unambiguous fashion. This is a once in several decades opportunity to come to an arrangement that could work to the benefit of us, as well as the Russians and the people living in Ukraine and the rest of Europe.
So what do you say to the Mark Rutte's, who just I guess about 10 days ago?
Okay, before we get to Rutte, and he will say something about that, that's the core of Doug's plan. Cut off the aid to the Ukrainians, so the war, is over. Get all the Americans out of Ukraine, and then talk to Putin about a broader settlement for Europe. Scott Rutte is saying exactly the same thing. He's saying, this is not Trump's war. He doesn't have to get more deeply involved in it at this point. At least, even if in some ways it is Trump's war, for the last 4 years it hasn't been. So Trump can say, this is not my war. It is not a good war. It has had out all kinds of damaging effects. So we're going to stop it, from our end. That's going to bring an end to it because the Ukrainians can't continue without us. And then we're going to negotiate a larger peace deal with the Russians that's good for all the people concerned. I think that's the way to approach things.
Yes, we're going to approach it like adults.
Yeah. And we're going to approach it like people who don't want to see wholesale slaughter in the world. I know it's jarring to see basically a couple of military men coming forward and proposing that, but it's true. There are many military men who recognize the futility and stupidity of the Ukraine war from the get-go.
Went in front of a panel of NATO leaders and said, we have to keep strengthening Ukraine, because if we don't, Russia will just continue moving on to the west. What do you say to that?
Is this Rubio?
Rutte, Mark Rutte.
Oh, Rutte, the Dutchman. He's irrelevant. He's a puppet. We just put people into these jobs that are going to say whatever we tell them to say. That was true for his predecessor, Stoltenberg from Norway. Now we have Rutte, the Dutchman. Forget them. They're irrelevant. The elites in Europe are done. They're finished. Let me explain. In every nation in Europe, there is a right-wing nationalist government waiting to take over. Whether they get into power next week, in 6 months, or a year, I can't predict, but they're coming. And they deserve power because they are telling their people exactly what, you, I, and many other Americans have told our own people. We are America first. We need to focus on what's happening here at home. There is no reason for us to be involved in conflicts in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, with Russia, or anybody else. And that's what the Germans, the French, I think eventually the British, the rest of the Europeans are all coming around to this understanding. This is not 1936. It's not 1939. It's not 1945. This is a different world. And we should be concerned about our survival, the survival of our states, our way of life, our culture, our languages, our civilization. That's where we should focus. That has been Putin's focus. That's why he's winning and we are losing.
Now,
Okay, I think I'm going to stop things there. D, I think you have to go and set up your show, correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so I will wind up this one in the next 10 minutes or so. I'm not going to go further with this particular video. I think the main message is out.
Yes.
And you saw how explicitly it was stated by Doug. And I think it's a very good statement of, what we ought to do. Okay, at this point, I recommend the rest of this video to people. I originally intended to go to 44 minutes. So he has a lot more to say in terms of embellishing the suggestion that he made here. Okay, but after 44 minutes, they switch over to West Asia, okay, and to Israel. And he has some very good things to say about that also. So I recommend the whole video to you, but I think I'm going to stop sharing this now, and I'm going to go to the final thing I hope to cover tonight while Dee goes to her show, and I will be joining her, okay, in just a few minutes, okay, after I take care of the last thing we were going to do on this particular show. Okay, do you have any final thing to say, Dee, before? Oh, I think Dee has already gone. So, okay, I'm going to wind this up. Okay, I'm going to go to some comments first before I dig into the final thing. It's very short. Evelina says the comments on the TRT thread were asking Jolani to get rid of Israel and the U.S. first and admonishing him to join Russia. That's funny. Others insisting Jolani take back the Golan Heights. I don't know if Jolani is capable of doing that. Evelina says, but seemed okay with the U.S. presence, laughed out loud. Common denominator was Israel out of Syria. Steve Wolfbrand says NATO should be disbanded. And of course, Doug thinks that also. And he says we need Tulsi confirmed. I agree. We do need Tulsi confirmed. I hope she is confirmed. Evelina says, ha ha ha. And Evelina says, but Douglas MacGregor doesn't think much of the Ukrainians. Well, I don't think he thinks much of the Ukrainian government, but I think he actually has a lot of respect for the Ukrainians as soldiers. Scott Ritter also has a lot of respect for them as soldiers as well. What Scott is given to saying is that, they don't give up until the end, but generally speaking. And the reason why they don't is because they're Russians, and Russians don't give up until the end. That may be the truth of the matter. We can never forget that Russia started in Kiev. Kiev was the first capital, of Russia. There was, some who've made clear, there was a Kievan Rus before there was a Muscovy Rus. So we all need to keep that in mind. Steve says the new warfare will be drones and robots. and Evelina refers to military ability, all good comments. Trump won't recognize the EU anymore. I read he wants to deal with nations individually. I think he does, and make arrangements that are bilateral arrangements. And Evelina comments and says, Eucadians. Yeah, the Eucadians. Yeah. Okay, the last thing I wanted to cover, which I'll cover in just a few minutes, was this astonishing thing that occurred with respect to Trump. So this is an article from Axios. Donald Trump, crypto billionaire. Oops. Went too far with that one. This article is by Felix Salmon, who's a well-known analyst for a long time, one of the best in the business. Here are components of Trump's wealth as of January 19, 2025, just before he went into the White House. Okay, Dollar Trump, which is the name of the meme coin that was issued by the Trump Organization, was worth $56.6 billion. Also, other stock of Donald Trump was worth $4.6 billion, and all our other assets were worth $2.6 billion. That makes Donald Trump's worth on paper roughly $63 billion as of 7 a.m. ET Sunday, January 19th. It excludes any income he made from selling $200 million of his meme coins on January 17th. So, the Dollar Trump meme coin, a financial asset that didn't exist on Friday afternoon, now accounts for about 89% of Donald Trump's net worth. Why it matters? The coin, technically a token that's issued on the Solana blockchain. In other words, the Solana is the cryptocurrency. And the token, okay, Dollar Trump, he lives on that cryptocurrency blockchain. So it's based on that cryptocurrency, has massively enriched Trump personally, enabled a mechanism for the crypto industry to funnel cash to him, and created a volatile financial asset that allows anyone in the world to financially speculate on Trump's political fortunes. After another massive overnight rally, as of Sunday morning, Trump's crypto holdings were worth as much as $58 billion on paper, enough with his other assets to make him one of the world's 25 richest people. Once again, according to this above, worth about $65 billion. Okay, notice immediately, we've talked about his very big donor, specifically Adelson, and how much money they gave to Trump, $100 million in the last campaign. Trump, on paper, is now richer, than Adelson. She comes in at about 25 to 35 billion. He is worth that 65 billion on paper right now. Well, the Biden administration broadly took the view that meme coins like Dollar Trump are securities subject to SEC regulation. The incoming Trump administration is pledged to be much more crypto-friendly and to regulate such coins with a light or non-existent touch. So, I'm not going to read the whole rest of it because my time is running out here. But some 200 million of the 1 billion total coins have already been released and are being actively traded. The rest, which are owned by Trump-controlled organizations, will be able to be sold at various points over the next 3 years, starting in April. On average, Trump companies will be able to sell some 24 million coins per month into the market, which at current prices would amount to an income of 1.73 billion per month or 20.7 billion per year. Although no one has a clue what the value of the coin will even be this afternoon, let alone 3 years from now. Not to be outdone, Mrs. Trump, specifically Melania, launched her own coin on Sunday night, which goes by her name, and it almost immediately achieved a market capitalization north of $5 billion. So now, if she wants to, she can just say goodbye to Trump, right? Because she's worth $5 billion. During the first Trump administration, there were worries that individuals were able to enrich the president by staying at his hotel. Since then, he's listed a meme stock where he controls more than 50% of shares and now has a meme coin that's even less tethered, to reality. Between the lines, the emoluments clause of the Constitution, written in 1787, hardly envisaged a world where a president could conjure billions of dollars of wealth out of nowhere by just endorsing a meme. Well, that's about all I have to say about that, except that I think that there's a violation of the Constitution in there somewhere, the Domestic Emoluments Clause. The other thought I want to leave you with is, could other celebrities do meme coins and become billionaires themselves very quickly? For example, could Jon Stewart do a meme coin and become a multi-billionaire very, very quickly, and be able to do super PAC support for various campaigns? All I got to say is the world's getting really crazy. And I leave you with that particular thought for tonight. I'll be back on Saturday, but before that, I am going over to join Dee on her stream, which will begin in 1 minute at, of course, Around the World with Dee and Friends. That's the YouTube channel. So it's good night. For me, maybe I'll look at one or two other comments. Sandy says, if she's smart, she'd leave him. Yeah. So I kind of think that too. Evelina says, thanks, Dr. Joe. So good night, everybody. And I'll see you later tonight. And I'll also see you on Saturday. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing that. And I'm going to end the stream here.